into recording. Mr. Mark Lebedew, Richard Casutt here from Volleyball New Zealand. Thanks for coming online and doing this interview. We were looking forward to being face-to-face with you in New Zealand on the weekend, but obviously COVID's hit us pretty hard. So, yeah, thanks for making yourself available on the other side of the world. And I suppose the best things to initially learn about you, just where you are now, what are you doing? Obviously, there's a few volleyballs in the background. Just who's Mark Lebedew?
Well, okay. Thanks for the opportunity to talk. I was looking forward to coming to New Zealand. I've been a few times over the journey and always enjoyed the passion that New Zealand has, or the New Zealand volleyball community has. So I'm happy to be able to do this in this format at least. I come from a volleyball family. My dad was involved with volleyball before I was born. The joke is that I went to my first national championships at the 8-month moment of my mum's pregnancy. So I grew up in that, although I didn't start playing until I was 13 or 14. So at some point, I decided that the only conceivable life path for me was to be a coach. It was a ridiculous thought that I had at some moment of weakness, but once I had that thought, then I did the study. I did a sports science degree, focused all my energy within that in the volleyball direction, and with that goal in mind. At that time, in the Australian sporting system, they had a program that was called the National Scholarship Coach Program. The idea being to help players, particularly national team players, make a jump or make a step in the coaching pathway. And I'd been a national level player, played a few national team games, played at Trans-Tasman back in probably was the first Trans-Tasman in 1990. So I got a chance to be part of that program, which was to spend a year with the full-time program that we had at the time in Sydney. And basically from there, I stayed in the Australian system, ended up being the assistant coach at the Sydney Olympics. And to cut the rest of the story short, sometime after that, the moment passed in Australia. I said, how hard can it be to get a job in Europe? Turned out that it's really, really hard. But I am the luckiest person in the world. So I found the one job that I had a possibility to get, had one offer the next year, took that, and so on. And here, and 18 years later, I live in Poland with my Polish wife. Been working in the Polish league for the last 4 years. Before that, the German league, and bunch of experiences before that. So that's where we are today.
That's incredible. So from a young age, you just said, I'm going to be a coach, and the dream was to become a professional coach. Yeah. I
was 21 when I made that decision. I'd done some other stuff after school. I was in Europe playing. Not at a high level, but found a team and somebody who'd let me live in their house, and and I was playing and trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, and that was, I said, coaching, and I had no idea what coaching actually meant. If I did, there's no way I would have done it. It's completely different to what the 21-year-old version of me thought it was going to be, but that's once I started, I guess I got into it or had some successes and thought maybe I can do this. Okay. And then stubbornness kicked in, or persistence, depending on how you look at it.
Nice. And so You talked about a bit of luck. You threw yourself into Europe. What was the luck? What club was it? How did you make the contacts? Is it on the back of being an assistant in Australia that got some name out there? Was it a mate that said, have a crack here? Is it...
Well, I had one of my players at the time, so young player from Adelaide. He made contact with an agent. He gave me the contact details. I made contact with an agent. We were actually his first two clients. He was a volleyball guy who was just starting to work in that area, and he said, sure, no problem. How hard can it be? And he sent out, I don't know, 120 emails or something. He got the addresses from, this is 2002. He sent my CV, which had Olympics on it, which was something, to 120 different clubs, and got one reply. And it turned out to be one young guy who was starting up a program, a full-time junior program, and he saw the Olympics, and that was the only thing that he thought about. And he thought that this was a way for him, this would be a coup for him in his career. So he ended up really pushing it inside the club, who were mostly ambivalent, because at the time I didn't even speak any German, more than a few phrases. And then he quit after 1 month after I got the job. So I was just in the middle of nowhere. But yeah, that was the first one. It was the one young stupid guy who thought he was going to make a mark by signing me, forced it through when nobody was really interested, and then left me to my own devices.
Okay, so before I dig into lessons, if we had a Kiwi coach who was interested, what would he have to do now? Is it plausible, possible? Where would he go?
Well, right this very minute, it's probably not possible, because, but a lot of things have changed in the succeeding years. I don't know if it's necessarily my presence, what kind of effect that has, but there are now a few Australian coaches working in Europe. So off the top of my head, 4 who are wandering around in different places. So most of those or all of those, actually, no, I'll start again. So one of those, Lauren, was an ex-player. She got a job coaching in the club that she was playing in. Luke Campbell sent out 1,000 emails by himself. Luke Reynolds, and Sketch and Bomber made a contact somewhere, sent out a bunch of emails, that kind of thing. But the way to do it, or the way to start is, or the ways to start are as an assistant. So that to be an assistant, basically you need to have a friend or a contact who gets a job and then gives you a job. The other way is is in a lower league. So guys started in Denmark. Luke worked in Sweden and Cyprus. Lauren started in Switzerland where she was playing. But those are the starting points, and then it's not impossible. It's not easy to get a job there, but it's possible, because they have some opportunities for professional coaches, full-time coaches, and there seems to be opportunity to build up from there as your your personal network grows, and it seems like you can use that as a pathway.
Nice, cool. Cheers for sharing. On to a bit more coach-specific stuff here. One of the questions we've been throwing out there is your best 5 lessons you've learned from your career coaching.
My best 5 lessons.
I mean, I read your blog, so you've got a few, but
I've frozen up now. So because you gave me a heads up, and I did think a little bit about it. The first lesson, the number one advice that I always give coaches is to question everything. So that's the first thing. You need to, if you want to make your own way and to create something of your own, then you have to ask questions. You have to be fairly fearless in asking questions, because it turns out that a lot of people don't like when you ask questions. It's actually a pretty threatening thing for a lot of people. But when you find somebody who's willing to actually listen and then respond, then that's the first really valuable thing.
So that lesson thing, is that to every athlete, your management, the people you're working around you, the greater club, the national program? Is that everywhere and everything? Of yourself continuously?
Of yourself first and foremost. You have to be everything you do. You have to actually be fairly with yourself. You have to be fairly ruthless. So did this actually work? Was this the right idea? And in your own room by yourself, you can't fool yourself. It's easy to do, and you want to do it to make yourself feel better, but with yourself, you have to be pretty ruthless. If you have the second half is if you have the opportunity to speak to somebody else, then ask them why they do this. Why should you hold your hands in this way when you do something? Why do you have to move your feet in reception? Blah blah. And you'd be shocked by some of the answers or non-answers, but it's part of the process of learning and understanding and creating your own vision of the game and how the game actually works. The second one, and really I couldn't come up with 5, but the second one is that, to paraphrase some other people, it's not about volleyball. So the coaching, and this is the thing where the 21-year-old me was a complete idiot, was that coaching is nothing to do with volleyball. It's all about interacting with people. It's all about the relationships that you have with the group that you're working with and outside. And if you can create those relationships, if you can work with people, then whatever information that you have, whatever knowledge, whatever tactics, whatever philosophy, then you have a chance to get those things across. But the first thing and the decisive thing is how you work with people, particularly the players, the group that you want to get to play volleyball.
Nice.
And really, those are the 2 lessons.
Brilliant. Simple, but I suppose that's part of it. So are you happy sharing your, I don't know if your philosophy has changed, evolved. Obviously your knowledge and learnings have evolved from a 21-year-old, but what's your coaching philosophy now? And how do you live that when you coach now? And has it changed from at different times? And
when I was studying, my big projects were on coaching philosophy, and how important it was to have one, and you need to write it down and so on. I wrote it down at that time, which is 25 years ago or whatever it is, and I don't remember it word for word, but it's something along the lines of creating an environment where every player has the opportunity to achieve their goals. So that was the one that I came up with back then. And while I haven't thought about it explicitly for a long time, that's pretty close to what my philosophy is to this point. For me, the way that I work, the way that I look at the game, the way that I look at the whole work is that volleyball is about the team, and creating structures, creating relationships, creating interactions within the team that allow the team to have their best performances. And to do that, everybody has to have some connection to the team. They have to have the opportunity to achieve whatever their goals are. And that's not to say that you're going to be successful. That's not to say that everybody is actually going to be able to achieve their individual goals. But the understanding is that by working in a team, when the team has the best possible outcome, everybody has the best opportunity to achieve whatever their individual goals are. So that's my idea about the game. That's the way that I work, and I'm comfortable in saying that I've been able to do that pretty well over the years. You're still on mute, mate.
All right. Have you had any player clashes, assistant coach clashes, or management clashes where you've had challenges to I suppose abide that philosophy and have buy-in from individuals, stars, whatever the case may be? Because you've coached a lot of big names of the game. You've coached a lot of young people as well. I mean, what are some of those challenges to achieving that?
There have been clashes. Depends how you define clashes. If you mean a couple of words in practice, then that happens. It happens fairly regularly. If you're working with people every day, then it comes up. There have definitely been some longer term, let's say, conflicts between me and one or two players. It hasn't happened a lot, but I've had them. The thing that got through that moment was actually that we still had the same goal, where while we might have had some personal issues that seemed insurmountable at the time, we both had the same outcome goal. We both wanted to play and win and have a successful team. And you can't work like that forever, but you can certainly work like that for a while. That's inside the team. Outside the team, I've had plenty of clashes with management. Not very good at working with management. I like to be left alone to do what I do. So management presidents tend to have fairly strong opinions and often not rash. They're often not rational for a variety of reasons. So blow-ups with presidents happen a few times. There was one blow-up with a president who was upset because I accidentally parked in his parking space. It's more difficult to work with those people than to have personal issues with people who share the same goals.
Nice. Thanks for sharing. Last one, I suppose, which could be a lesson or not. How have you evolved? What are some of the characteristics that you've evolved as a coach through your times? Are you still? I mean, obviously you've changed from a 21-year-old, but I mean, the way you go about your business, I think, is still similar. You seem pretty detailed. You're obviously super passion's coming through straight away. So what's some of the things that you've evolved and you've been conscious of that you've sort of tried to do to improve yourself?
There were probably at least two sort of moments that where I changed fairly significantly, I think, in the way that I worked. One was fairly early on. When I started, I was a screamer because this was whatever, the early 90s, and coaches shouted, and and I did a lot of shouting during games and timeouts and whatever. Luckily, I worked this out pretty early on that the first thing is that players don't like being shouted at. Nobody likes being shouted at. Some people might say they can cope with it, but nobody likes it. And so if you're shouting at them, it means if they're not able to do, start again. If they're not able to do what you want them to do, they want to do, I'll start even again. Players want to do what you tell them to do. If for no other reason than they don't want to be shouted at. So if they're not doing the thing that you want to do, it's probably a failing in your communication, in your training, in some part of that. So then they don't want you to shout at them. So if they're not doing what you want, it's your fault somehow. So you have to then sit back and say, okay, what is it that I'm not doing well that they still can't serve over the net? It's not because they don't want to. So that was the first thing. So to stop being a shouter or a motivator, or however you want to call it. And that was a really big thing, because then I started to think a lot more about what I'm doing and how I actually work and how to make players better. I think that was a really positive thing. The second thing was much, much later, and was about working during the match, and particularly some of the emotional parts of being involved with a match, and specifically, trash talking, being on the referees all the time. And so I was people who knew me from back in the day. So I was a guy who was always on the referees as a player, as a coach. I wasn't the best trash talker, but I certainly never shied away from it, and was happy to be involved. I actually got one moment in a really big match, and I was chipping away at somebody on the other a player on the other team, and one of the coaches on the other team, when we changed ends, started having a go at me, and I looked at him and I said, "Oh wait, that's what I look like when I do that." And pretty much I said, "Okay, I don't want people to look at me like that." So pretty much from then on, I stopped trash talking and talking with players in the other team, and getting on the referees. So pretty much overnight, I said, "Okay, I'm not doing that anymore." And I think that's been a really positive thing it's helped me to be a better coach, and it also helped me. It ended up becoming a part of my reputation, which was a lot more positive than negative.
Wow, that's cool. And do you reckon that came about? You've got volleyball family, the Australian psyche is pretty tough. You've got footy. I had spent a little bit of time in South Australia. I picked up that it's ruthless, and that chirping is that's inbred. Car park beers, it continues on, and Marion car park, the chirping still continues after the game. Is that something that's come out of the society and the environment you've been part of, or you've just had that in you from the early days?
When I started playing when I was 14, my dad was the president of the local association, and I'd always been around, as a kid and ball boy and playing in the corner and whatever. But players and presidents aren't always necessarily beloved in their time, because there's always some conflict or some discussion about something. The little kid who's come up and maybe he's going to be, the president's son, maybe gets picked on a little bit. And it happened that I remember one of the very first tournaments I played against guys who were 5-6 years older than me, and I was standing at the net setting in the warm-up, and they were hitting balls at me in the warm-up. It's one of the first matches that I ever played, and these were national team players who were hitting balls at me for no other reason than I was the son of my father. So yeah, that it was fairly cutthroat, and that's the environment that I grew up in. Mute.
Congratulate you on making that change, because it's a big thing. You know, it's been part of you for a long, long time, and I suppose have that realization and make that change and see the benefits is awesome.
Yeah.
Playing style. So there's a bit of a question around, you know, do you have a way of a system that you like doing, or do you need to build your system based on your players? And what's your approach around that sort of concept or concepts?
I have an idea about how I want to play, and as I kind of intimated before, the way that I want to play is about how the team plays together. Is the way that we move from one phase to another, the way that we interact, the way that we make decisions as a group, how we identify game situations, how we decide what to do as a group. So one thing is that I don't have a lot of fixed rules about, in this situation, player X has to play the ball to position Y. It's about all players being inside the game, understanding the situation, and as a group, individually coming up with the same solution to the group problem. So that's the part of the game, my way of working and thinking about the game. And that's not dependent on players particularly. So, you know, if I have a better receiver or worse receiver or a middle who does this or whatever, it doesn't really make a lot of difference, that kind of thing. So tactics, that is the way of playing. And I'm not averse to risk. I don't want players who are minimizing risk for the sake of minimizing risk. My teams are pretty aggressive in searching for ways to score points. I don't like the philosophy of minimizing errors and letting the other team make errors. For me, that's not it's not an interesting way to play, and I don't think it's the best way to play. And my teams end up as a combination of those things of being good at block and defense and transition. So whatever my reputation is that my teams are pretty good at defense, block and defense combination, and transition play, and being a pretty good team. So those are the things that I focus on. And I was talking about this in another context yesterday, that in the level that I am, there's a lot of similarities between teams, and everybody we have the opportunity to plug players into particular places, because we can choose anybody, more or less. And so, my style doesn't vary a lot from team to team, because the individual differences aside, we end up sort of having the same basic look. Mike.
If I threw you back into an under 20 situation, so you've gone, actually, you know what? I want to improve Australian volleyball for the next generations, and Australian Volleyball said, right, Mark, we've got 200K to pay you for a couple of years, because that's what it costs to pay you these days. How would you apply those principles in developing your youth program for a national team that aren't at the level that you're dealing with right now? Tough question. I know. I'm here to be.
You're not here to be my friend, apparently. That's a really good question, and it's sort of something I've thought about a lot in my role as a national team coach. I'm not sure that there's a really easy answer. I think the way that I think about organizations, the way that I think about things on a larger scale is the way that I think about things on the team scale. And the only way for anybody or for any group to achieve whatever their goals are to work together. And I don't necessarily see that in Australian volleyball. So, everybody might have the same goal, but they all have a different idea about how to get there, and they then go and do their own things, thereby ensuring that nobody has a chance of achieving their goal. So if I was going to be full-time in Australia, that would probably be my focus, is to get around and to have everybody working towards a singular vision that I don't think is there now.
Cheers, man. A tough one, a very tough one. I think you've alluded to...
This is not going to be shown in Australia, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, it probably applies around the world, mate. I might share it to one of Australia,
It's I don't mind. I've said the same thing to him.
Yeah.
But the point, I think that this goes to all kinds of groups that all kinds of groups wherever they are. It's the only way to work, and the big companies spend a lot of money trying to figure out exactly how to go about that. There's a project you can Google that Google did a big study inside their company on how to work together, how to get the best outcomes in small teams, medium teams, and so on. So it's not what I'm saying. It's not me coming up with some idea and being the only one in the world. It's you can go to any bookshop, and if there's still bookshops where you are, and find 50 books on it, just in the business section maybe. But the how to do that is the question.
Nice. So that rolls into a bit of and you've alluded to team culture, and how you run your teams. And you talk about the team making the decision. Is it by design, or it's just the way you are that you encourage that sort of that buy-in from people? Are there core values that you set in your culture, or that obviously the team sets them? Do you go through a process? You've got a new season starting. There's some new players in it. Does it just happen by the way you are, or do you actually sort of set some things in place to help build that culture?
Your questions are getting better. You're on a roll. The part of it is the way that I am, and some people don't. Some people have difficulty with it. A lot of players grow up in an environment where they're told exactly what to do all the time, and it takes a fair bit of work, and you have to be pretty strong sometimes in not telling people what to do, or telling them that they have to work it out. A lot of it is the way that I am, and a lot of it is how over time I've worked out the best way to do things is for me. And a lot of it is actually making making mistakes, and or going through different things, being ruthless with myself at the end and saying, actually saying, well, I didn't need to do that, or I did need to do that, and following that path, not a path, following that light that stays in front. This was a good way. That was a false light, and actually being able to follow that. Did that make sense?
Yeah, I suppose that it's that self-assessment. I suppose the next part of it for me is that you talked about player buy-in. Have you had to move players on? They haven't fitted that way. They've really struggled with it. I mean, there's those players that overthink scenarios. You keep telling them the same shit or don't tell them the same stuff, and they work it out, but then they don't do it. And they OCD almost tendencies, and they just keep overkilling themselves on it versus just getting it done. Have you had to deal with? You would have dealt with many of those players. How have you dealt with some, and what's some advice you'd give to us dealing with those people?
The advice for everything is you just keep plugging. You just keep plugging away, and everything, and all of it's a process. Nobody's ever perfect. So the only thing you think about is to be a little bit better, and it's the same with every. This is perhaps another about how I work is I'm looking at the things that people can do. So my focus is always on the things that people can do, and I don't dwell on. I'm not super interested in the things that people can't do, and it turns out that people can do a lot more than they think they can do, and the thing that you might have to actually do is to open the door and show them, actually, you can do this, and the coach that you had before that didn't let you do it was an idiot. And so, because he was, obviously. So, the focus is on things you can do, and you keep plugging. You don't try to make a perfect player. You try to make a player who is a little bit better today than he was yesterday. And if he's not better, then you keep trying to go a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, and working in increments. And I've never had to get rid of a player for that reason. You can always, players leave of their own accord if they don't like the way. So I've never got rid of a player specifically for that reason.